So Festus came into the province. And 3 days later he went up to Jerusalem from Caesarea. And the high priest and leaders of the Jews informed him against Paul and pleaded with him, asking a favor from him that he might summon him to Jerusalem, planning an ambush to kill him on the way. However, Festus replied that Paul should be kept in Caesarea, as he was about to depart for there shortly. Therefore, he said, "Those among you who are able, come with me. If there is anything against this man, let them accuse him." And after he had spent over 10 days with them, he went down to Caesarea. The day following, he sat on the judgment seat and gave command for Paul to be brought in. And when he arrived, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood round about, leveling many serious charges against Paul, which they were unable to prove. In his own defense, he said, "Neither against the law of the Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar have I done any wrong." But Festus, wanting to grant the Jews a favor, answered Paul and said, "Are you willing to go up to Jerusalem, there to be judged before me concerning these things?" Paul knew that would mean death to him. Then Paul said, "I stand at Caesar's judgment seat, where I ought to be judged. I have done the Jews no wrong, as you also very well know." Now this was also the right of a Roman citizen, nobody else. If you were a Roman citizen, you could appeal to be heard by Caesar himself. And that was it. You couldn't, after you appealed to Caesar, you couldn't retract it. But you had that right.
Why did Festus want to please the Jews? Was he afraid of the Jews?
Well, this area of the world was one of the most difficult to manage. They would riot at the drop of a hat. You've already seen that. So they were constantly trying to find ways to keep the Jews placated. So if they could do the Jews a favor without threatening the Roman rule, they would do it. Just because they knew the consequences of not doing it. Paul went on to say, "If I really am doing wrong or have done anything worthy of death, I refuse not to die. But if there is nothing to what these men accuse me of, no one can give me to them. I appeal to Caesar." Well, that was a big deal. Then, after Festus conferred with the council, he said, "What? This guy's appealing to Caesar." And they said, "Well, you know the law." He answered, "Appeal to Caesar, have you? To Caesar you shall go." Well, then the Jews knew they couldn't get him. He was out of their hands now. No way they were going to get him back to Jerusalem. After some days had passed, King Agrippa and Bernice came to Caesarea to visit Festus. And when they had spent many days there, Festus laid Paul's case before the king, saying, "There is a certain man left a prisoner by Felix, about whom, when I was in Jerusalem, the chief priests and the Jewish elders informed me, asking for judgment against him. I answered them that it is not the custom of Romans to give any man over to death as a favor before the accused have the accusers face to face and have an opportunity to defend himself against the charge. So, when they were assembled here, I made no delay. The next day I sat on the judgment seat and ordered the man to be brought in, against whom, when the accusers stood up, they brought not one charge of the kind I was anticipating. But they had certain issues relating to their own religion against him, and about one Jesus, who had died, whom Paul claimed to be alive. And being uncertain about this controversy, I asked whether he was willing to go to Jerusalem and be judged there concerning these things. But when Paul appealed to be kept in custody for a decision by Augustus, I ordered him to be held until I sent him to Caesar. Then Agrippa said to Festus, I would hear the man myself. Tomorrow then, he said, you will hear him. The next day Agrippa and Bernice came with great pomp and entered the audience hall along with the tribunes and the most prominent men of the city, and Festus ordered Paul to be brought in. So Paul was brought in. This royal crowd is around. The next day, Agrippa and Bernice came. Then Festus made this announcement: King Agrippa and all men present with us, consider this man, regarding whom the whole multitude of the Jews pleaded with me, both in Jerusalem and here, crying out that he ought not to live any longer. But I found he had done nothing worthy of death. And when he appealed to Augustus, I decided to send him. I have nothing definite to write to our Lord about him. Therefore I have brought him before you all, and particularly before you, King Agrippa, so that an examination being made, I might have something to write. For it seems unreasonable to me to send a prisoner to Augustus and not indicate the charges against him.